Oh, yeah.
It's
All
funny.
right, here
It's
we
funny
go.
changing in the verse.
So Moses now has been with his wife and his son and his father-in-law for an indeterminate period of time. So continuing on, we are not going to know how old Moses is until we find out that he dies at the age of 120 and he starts leading, shepherding the people of Israel out of Egypt at the age of 80, because between the time of his death and the time of the beginning of the Exodus was, we are told, 40 years. So apparently, since this is now going to be uh, fairly quick, that we will move from Moses getting the call to the Exodus. It doesn't seem to be, it seems to be a matter of weeks or months, not years. So apparently Moses now is 80 years old.
Why was 40 such a magic number?
Uh, has to do a lot with the mystical numbers, probably out of the whole Mesopotamian Babylonian area, that fours are uh, a symbol of many,
Ah,
Oh,
but it's not a perfect number. Perfect numbers are multiples of 60. And that's why you live to be 120, two 60s.
mm, okay.
And 60 we know is a Babylonian Mesopotamian number because they worked from a sexagesimal system, which is why circles have 360 degrees. And minutes and seconds are all in multiples of 60s,
Yeah.
because six is the first perfect number because the sum of its roots and the product of its roots are the same.
Oh,
that's what 60
that's
is?
true.
1 plus 2 plus 3 equals 6. 1 times 2 times 3 equals 6.
Yes. Numbers.
And yeah, I mean, we know that they were very much into numerical analysis
Yes.
of things.
Yep.
So, yeah, so 4 and 4s are big numbers, 40 days and 40 nights. And the interesting thing about 120, of course, is it's a multiple of both 40 and it's got both 40 and 60, or 4 and 6 in it, because 120 is 340s and it's two 60s. So 120 becomes the perfect age because it's a many big number and it's a perfect number.
Mm,
So Moses is the only one, according to the Torah, who lives to be 120. Joseph and Joshua go only to 110.
So they
Aaron,
were imperfect.
yes, they were not the perfect person. Aaron, interestingly, of course, lives to be more than 120, but we're not really told that because Aaron is the older brother, and Aaron dies along the way, and it's a question of, does he die in the last year of the wanderings or in
mm,
the intermediate years of the wanderings that we don't really get a number for. So Moses, yes, Moses is 80 years old, 240s. And he's got apparently quite a bit of energy because, as we are seeing today now, he's a shepherd of the flock.
Hmm.
We've had those words before.
Yes. Well, we have, our whole, the Israelite biblical Hebrew roots are in the shepherding people, not in the coastal people, not in the farming people, not in the city people, not in the crafts people, not even in the trading people, but simply Bedouin shepherds. And Moses Verse 1, Umoshe haya ro'eh et son yitro chotno kohen Midian vayinhag et hatzon achar hamidbar vayavo el har ha'elohim choreva. So we're going to see some different language and some different geographical allusions in the two stories as well, uh, being possibly uh, slightly variant traditions of a similar root, or totally variant traditions that are combined in the later work of Ezra or whoever into what would appear then to become a common root. So we don't know if the Northern Kingdom tribes and the Southern Kingdom tribes, as they're divided up in Joshua, Judges, before we get to the combined kingdom under Samuel and Kings, we don't know if they were really kinsmen, if they were somewhat related, or if they were close enough to being non-Canaanite and some kind of Aramean travelers or wanderers that they were able to be convinced that they were kinsmen. So once again, we're going to be seeing the Leah tribes and the Rachel tribes, the Judah tribes and the Joseph tribes, or the two tribes of the southern kingdom and the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom. We don't know. And we don't know if the Levites, the Levies, who are now going to be in charge of these two communities, if they were a foreign tribe that came in and said, hey, we're your brothers too, and combined, all of that is going to be beyond the scope of what we're doing, and mostly because there's no way of knowing. There's no archaeological or textual evidence of the time period before the real construction of the Torah. But uh, fortunately, I'm not an academician, so therefore I can reconstruct history based on imagination, not needing archaeological and other proof texts. So we're looking at Moshe haya ro'et et son Yitro chotno kohen Midian. This whole thing, Yitro, this guy, uh, is almost always referred to in the Torah, not only in his relationship to Moshe, but in his relationship to his own roots. So Moses, Hayaroeh, was the shepherd or was shepherding. Roeh is both the noun and the present tense. So a shepherd shepherds. And in Hebrew, roeh would be the way of saying a shepherd shepherds. So roeh refers to both. But Moses was the shepherd of Son, or he shepherded, or he was shepherding. Again, if you want to actually do it as verbs, Moses was shepherding Son, the flock of. And the flock is now of Yitro, Chotno, his father-in-law, Kohen Midian, priest of Midian. And Vayinhag etzon, Vayinhag is actually the modern word for what a bus driver does.
Oh.
So he drove the flock, really, steered the flock. So Vayinhag etzon, he drove the flock. Achar had midbar. So Achar Hamidbar, Achar is a strange word to translate into English because it has several different English words that don't seem to be related. So Achar Hamidbar could be after the midbar or on the edge of the midbar or behind the midbar. So he's taking them to the very edge of the wilderness. And the midbar is the wilderness. My own play on the word midbar is that it's the same word as midaber, to speak. So this is a place where open speech can occur, just wide open spaces. Some often translated as desert, but the midbar is not really necessarily the desert. And we refer to a lot of times midbar sin, the midbar of Sinai.
Mm-hmm.
But here you're going to notice it's not the midbar of Sinai, but it's going to be the midbar of Chorev, which when the stories become combined, Chorev and Sinai become synonymous terms. We don't know if, in fact, Chorev and Sinai were to the two different stories synonymous terms. The other question is, where is this going on? Where was Midian? And Midian was not in the Sinai Peninsula. Midian was in what is now southern Jordan,
Hmm.
on the Arabian Peninsula side of the sea, or the Gulf of Aqaba, or the Gulf of Eilat. So if he's taking the flock to the edge of the midbar, is that midbar then he's taking them back over to Sinai, or is Midian an extensive enough Jordanian area that it has both a settled area and has a desert or wilderness at its edge? Again, if you look at the map, the modern map of Jordan and Saudi Arabia, you'll see that there's places where there would have been cities, there's places where there would have been wilderness. Yitro has a flock, but we don't know if Yitro is a Bedouin flock herder or Yitro is a settled flock herder. By the way, the Midbar Midian is right across the divide from where Sodom and Gomorrah were. And Sodom and Gomorrah at the southern base of the Dead Sea was not always a barren land, because we know from the early Abraham story, Lot said, I like that really beautiful green valley down there of Sodom and Gomorrah. And it's only the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah that makes that southern area of the Dead Sea, in fact, a barren, salty wilderness. So we don't really know where all of this is happening. So, but Moses takes them to the very edge of the wilderness. Vayavo el har ha'elohim choreva. And he comes to the mountain of the gods, or the mountain of God. Our continuing confusion over the use of the term by the biblical author. And it's towards Chorev. So he comes down to that mountainous area of southern Jordan, of the Midianite world, and he comes up to the mountain of the gods, the Midianite version of Olympus. And we don't know if Moses knows it's the mountain of the gods, or if the author, the narrator, knows that it's the mountain of God, and Moses is going to find that out.
Hmm.
So our opening verse still doesn't give us a clear picture of who knows what and where they are.
Hmm.
Then we have to skip to the second half of verse 4 and see if the story makes sense without verses 2, 3, and the first half of 4. So Moses has
Yeah.
now driven the flock to the edge of the wilderness in the area of Chorev at some mountain area or some specific mountain in the wilderness. Vayikrav Elohim, Vayikrav Elav, Vayikra Elav Elohim mitoch hasneh, Vayomer Moshe Moshe, Vayomer Hineni. So he's got the flock. What is the landscape like? Well, we know it's mountainous. We know it's a bit of a wilderness, but we also know that there's vegetation. Otherwise, why take the flock there?
Mm-hmm.
So there's grasses and bushes. So he comes to the mountain of the gods, or mountain of God, which is in the Chorev area, and Vayikra Elav Elohim, and calls out to him Elohim, God, gods. He gets some kind of divine voice, mitoch hasneh, from the midst of the bush.
Mm-hmm.
Which bush? Well, if we skip from 1 to 4, as we're reading it now, then it's simply the bush at which the flock are grazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We don't need any more detail about it than the bush, because we've already had enough. We don't know where we are in verse 1, so therefore we can be just as confused about what
Yeah.
bush. So if you don't know the story of a burning bush, etc., it's not necessary for our story. So God calls out to Moses from within the bush, and we could say at which they are grazing. Vayomer Moshe, Moshe, Vayomer Hineni. And God says, Moses, Moses. And he says, behold, I am here. Behold, I am. This double call of a person's name has happened twice already within the Torah and will happen once more in the Tanakh. It happened when the Abraham was about to sacrifice his son Isaac, holding the knife over him, and God says, Avraham, Avraham. It happens a second time when Yitzchak has been told, don't leave this land under any circumstance. And now his son Yaakov is considering leaving the land because of a famine. And God calls to him and says, Yaakov, Yaakov, which is, you can leave the land. And now we get Moshe, Moshe, when Moses is settled in and has been shepherding his flocks, his father's flock, for some 40, 50 years, because one would assume that he didn't arrive at Midian at the age of 80. That when he was killing the taskmaster, he was possibly 20s or 30s. And so he fled, found his bride, found a new family with his father-in-law, and has been doing it from some indeterminate youth time until he's now 80 years old.
Wow.
So this is a major life transition during his preparation for retirement from shepherdness, getting ready to take the required minimum distribution from the flock. And God says, Moshe, Moshe. So a lot of the commentary about these three calls is these are major transitions of God presence, God awareness, and God relationship. Abraham, Abraham, no child sacrifice. Yaakov, Yaakov, I am a portable God. I am not a God of the land. Moshe, Moshe, you have a lot more to do in your life than just shepherd your father-in-law's flock. And the fourth one, just a spoiler alert, because we will not get it in our Torah study, is Shmuel, Shmuel.
Oh.
Samuel now will become the last judge and the first prophet and the kingmaker. Up until then, he was simply an apprentice judge to Eli. So
Where is that exactly?
that's in the book of Samuel.
Yeah.
So here we have Moshe, Moshe. We're going to go back and look at 2, 3, and 4. We get this sense that Moses is called twice. Abraham was called twice because God really needed to get Abraham's attention.
Yeah.
Abraham, what? Abraham, don't move the knife. And there's one midrash way back then that we looked at many years ago in our early Genesis studies, where we have the scene of Abraham holding the knife and God going, Abraham, Abraham, don't kill your son. And Abraham says, too late. And the Yaakov again is Yaakov. What? He's about to do or not do. And God says, okay, go do. And here Moshe is just at a bush. And somehow God is calling to him. And God is calling Moshe. And Moshe says, what? Who's there? And God says again, Moshe. And that's going to happen again with Shmuel, because God's going to call Shmuel actually by name once, and Shmuel's going to think Eli is calling him. And Eli says, go back, and if God, you hear that call again, say, "Who I'm here," and you'll be called twice. So this idea of when God calls, it's so startling that we don't even know what's happening. God has to call a second time. But within the text, there's no indication of why Moshe. But Moses' response is Hineni. And then we have to go down to 6. Vayomer Anochi Elohei Avicha, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Velohei Yaakov, Ve'esater Moshe Panav, Ki Yarei Mechabit El HaElohim. And it makes sense. God says, Moses, Moses. Moses says, yeah, what do you want? And God says in verse 6, here's what I want. But before I tell you what I want, I want to make sure you know who I am. Anochi Elohei Avicha, I am the God of your father. Now, of course, we have a question of who is Moses' father? Well, his actual father is some Levitical man that he, as far as we know, never knew. Because we don't know while he's being nursed and weaned and raised and whatever by his mother, if his father's even in the picture. We don't know if his father's paying child support, if he's an absentee father. We never get Moses' father's story again after he gets born. Moses' adopted father is Pharaoh. I am the God of your father would then possibly be, I am the God of Pharaoh. So God has to clarify that and say, no, I'm not the God of Pharaoh. I'm the God of Avraham. I am the God of Yitzchak. And then we have an and I am the God of Yaakov. Now, Hebrew does not have commas. But whenever we have Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, it's always Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. In other places, we would expect Avraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov. So in other kinds of construction, other kinds of lists of names or whatever, the more common would have been Elohei Avraham ve'Elohei Yitzchak ve'Elohei Yaakov. And we don't get that. Which leads then to further questions and discussion among scholars as to whether the God of Avraham and the God of Yitzchak were two different stories of ancestors of what will become the tribes. We also have places where we are told the God of Yaakov is told, the God of your father Avraham and the God of your father Yitzchak.
Mm-mm.
So do we have a Yaakov from Avraham story and a Yaakov from Yitzchak story, which were separate Northern Kingdom stories, which were then combined by the time the Northern Kingdom became some kind of united tribes or some kind of common ancestry story, and the Avraham and Yitzchak are divided up. One of the additional information that is often informs that is the idea that pretty much nothing that Yitzchak does is different from what Avraham does. Avraham does wife sister to the king of Gerar, Avimelech. Yitzchak does wife sister to in Gerar to the king Avimelech. Avraham digs wells. Yitzchak will dig the same wells. So there's a number of different issues. But in any case, if we read one, read blue, then blue, then blue, we don't really feel like we're missing anything.
No.
And God says, so I am the God of all the way through Yaakov. And Avraham, who has already said, Hineni, I am here, to some disembodied voice. Because we don't know what Abraham is seeing other than a bush. Abraham sees the bush, but hears a voice. If you want to get how that works, I recommend you watch the movie Three Amigos and the scene with the singing bush. If you haven't seen the movie, it's a great scene. So the bush is singing. Here, the bush is talking. Another aspect, by the way, we're going to see is in the blue stories, in general, God talks directly to the chosen one to whom God is talking. In the red story, God usually talks through an angel, through an intercessory, an intermediary, a messenger. And we'll go back and see that in the red. So Moses hears the voice. Moses says, yeah, what do you want? And the voice says, watch the attitude, Moses. This is who I am. And Moses, vayisater Moshe panav. And Moses hid his face. Seter is a secret, a hidden thing. So vayisater Moshe, and Moses hid his face. Why? Ki, because or for, Yarei mehabit el ha-Elohim, he was afraid or trembling or awestruck to look at or to stare at. Habit is a lot more intense looking than just ro'eh. So to stare at or to really confront face to face, ha-Elohim, the gods. And so we start with the gods. In the middle, we have a gods, and then we end up with the gods. So we go from definite to indefinite, back to definite, and we're always using the plural form. But clearly, there is some sense that Moses has that you don't look at God's face to face. You don't stare at God's. That's the end of our story. from that vantage point for today.
Well.
And now for something completely different. The Monty Python version, verse 2. And verse 2, Moses was not necessarily formally shepherd. Moses was just hanging out with his wife and his son that he was given and everything. And now, Vayera malach Adonai elav balabat esh mitoch hasneh vayar v'hine hasneh boer ba'esh v'hasneh einenu ukal. So now all of a sudden Moses, Vayera malach Adonai, and appeared an angel or a messenger of Yud-He Vav-He, Elav, to him. Where we left off before verse 2 was Moses is hanging out in his father's Midianite area, his father-in-law's Midianite area. He's got a wife, he's got a son, he's named the son, and now a malach Adonai, a messenger of Yud-He Vav-He, appears to him, and it appears to him bilabat esh, in the flame of fire. Labat is a flame, esh is fire, in a flame of fire, mitoch hasneh, from the midst of the bush. And again, the bush is apparently there, but that's not surprising because he's in a bushy area of the Midianite people, lots of bushes growing. So we don't know what he's doing at the bush. Notice he doesn't have the flock here. He's just hanging out, left over from last week, with his wife and son in his father-in-law's area, maybe relaxing under a bush from the heat, by a bush, sunbathing. So there's probably parts of both of these stories that didn't get included because they were not necessary to the story of combining them into one unified story. So there may have been something about Moses was wandering along the road and he looks over at a bush, but that didn't get included. All we need is the messenger of God, and it's Yud-He Vav-He, not Elohim, now appears in a labat esh, in a flame of fire, mitoch hasneh, from the midst of a bush, vayar, and he looks, so this would now be Moses, and he sees, v'hine hasneh boer ba'esh, and he sees that, behold, the bush is burning in fire, v'hasneh eineni ukal, and the bush is not consumed. Ukal comes the word ochel, eat. So the bush is not being eaten up.
So what is hasneh?
Sneh is a bush.
Oh, a bush. Okay.
It's just the bush. And it's the bush. But we don't know what the definite article means within the context of the story. In the blue story, it was clearly the bush at which he was grazing. But here, there's no flock, there's no grazing. So maybe this is, the bush that will become the Midianite Christmas tree. The favorite bush, the border bush of Yitro's land. And notice he's not at Chorev or Midbar or Sinai in this story. If we take this story picking up from where we left off in the red story, which was Moses gets a wife and Moses has a kid, and they name the little boy, and the next thing we know, Moses looks at the bush.
Hmm.
I mean, maybe he's got the trimmer in his hand and he's about to trim the bush, but he's at a bush. And now it is no longer a bush, it is the bush. And he looks, and the bush is burning. It's a flame. It's got flames of fire coming up from it. And then he sees it, and behold, and the bush is burning with flames, burning in flame. But the bush is not consumed. The bush is not turning in, nothing in the bush is turning into ash.
Hmm.
Um, so Rabbi Larry Kushner, actually pointed out in a drosh of that he wrote is this is not an instantaneous action. If you're sitting in front of a fireplace and you walk up to the fireplace, you do not know immediately whether it's real logs or artificial logs.
Hmm.
When you see a fire in a fireplace, you don't know immediately if the fire is coming from the logs or the fire is coming from the gas jet below the logs. You have to sit and you have to watch a fire for a while to see if those logs are turning into ash. So, as opposed to the blue story, which is instantaneous action, God, Bush, voice, call. Don't need to wait. And in fact, Moses immediately says, I better turn my head aside. I don't want to look at this God in the bush. In the red story, a bush is burning. Moses turns aside and watches the bush. And Moses notices the bush is not turning into ash. The flames are in the bush, but the flames are not of the bush.
Hmm.
In trying to explain this story in modern scientific terms, various commentaries have said it was ball lightning. It was an electrostatic charge in the bush, which looks like a spark or looks like a flame, but doesn't actually consume it.
Hmm.
Others will say that this was an area of volcanic action and underground heat sources, and you have the heat waves that happen in a very, very hot desert that make it look like the bush is actually burning when it's really an optical illusion, a
Hmm.
little bit of a mirage. In any case, the question for the biblical author was, what are they saying? Well, they're saying clearly, and I think Larry Kushner was right, was onto what the biblical author had in mind. This was not a timeless action. This was a time frame that we don't know how long it takes. In the same way, we don't know how long Moses spent anywhere here. This is clearly something that's been happening for a while, and Moses has to stop and really ponder the situation. So, the end of 2, he sees that the bush is not being consumed. Vayomer Moshe, Asura na ve'er'eh et hamar'eh hagadol hazeh, madua lo yiv'ar hasneh. And so Moses now says, Vayomer, Moses says, Vayomer Moshe, Asurana, please let me turn aside. Let me pause and ponder. Ve'er'eh, and I will see. Et hamar'eh hagadol hazeh. This mar'eh is a vision. Again, the root word seeing. I will see this, and it's not just any vision, it's a mar'eh hagadol, a big vision. And it's not just a big vision, it's hagadol hazeh, this big vision. So again, the story is clearly taking time in red and taking no time in blue. Comments, questions? Okay, so he pauses. He says, I need to ponder this. I need to examine this please let me take some time to examine this phenomenon, this vision, this amazing, this huge sight, this big, extraordinary thing. I want to know, Madua lo yiv'ar hasneh. And yiv'ar, again, is related to the word at the end of, in the middle of verse 2, at the end of the line, boer, which is flaming. So I want to see, why is this sneh not flaming? That's why is it not actually on fire? Why is it not a flame? It looks like it's a flame, but the flame's not doing anything, so it's not really at flame. And so mar'eh could even be, again, the word seeing. I need to check out this amazing optical illusion
Hmm.
of the bush not actually in flames. So this is I need to take some time and I need to examine. And we have him not pausing from any activity. It's just Moshe all by himself, no flock, no midbar, no Chorev, no mountain of God. This is just a vision. And God can come up anywhere. Don't need a holy place. And then the first half of 4, Vayar Adonai Kisar Lirot. And Yud He Vav He saw that Sar Lirot, that Moses had turned aside to see. Again, doesn't actually connect to the blue story. And if you didn't have the blue story, this would be sufficient. Moses, in the blue story, God calls to Moses. In the red story, God signals Moses. That is, Moses has his phone on optical awareness, and his phone is flashing, not singing. So he sees the blinking light, and he says, "I better see who's on this call." So God sets up this optical contact signal, whatever, and Moses sees it and says, "I better check this out." And God then sees that Moses came to check it out. So now we have to jump down to verse 5, and we get Vayomer al tikrav halom sal na'alecha me'al raglecha ki hamakom asher ata omed alav admat kodesh hu. Now we don't need God calling, which was the second half of verse 4. God sees that Moses has turned aside and checked out this signal, the bat signal in the bush, whatever it is. And God says, and it's not God now, remember, it's the Malach Adonai, it's the messenger, the voice of God, the message of God. The God texts this giant cell phone that's flashing, the bush phone. And the first thing God says is, Al tikrav, do not approach, do not come close. So now Moses has seen it. Moses has turned aside. Moses wants to check it out. And before Moses can go get close and examine the individual flames or branches or whatever, God says, stay back. Again, a very different scene from the blue story that we read first.
Yeah.
God says, stay back, don't approach, do not come close. Before you get close, halom sal ma'alecha me'al raglecha. Remove the sandals from on your feet. And sal ma'alecha are the sandals. Me'al raglecha from on your feet. Halom, remove, take off, slip off your Skechers. Get barefoot. Ki hamakom asher ata omed alav admat kodesh hu. Because the place that you are standing upon it, a ground of holiness it is. God actually spoke Yoda in the Hebrew. So don't wear shoes when you come on my holy place. And that continues, for example, in Islamic culture.
Mm.
When you step into the holy space for worship, you take off your shoes. It did not carry over into traditional Judaism. We don't have to take our shoes off when we walk into the sanctuary. And we don't know if they had to take their shoes off when they walked into the Holy of Holies or into the tent or into the temple or into the tabernacle. So we don't know how much of this is actually Midianite or Bedouin or ancient Near Eastern. For that, we'd have to actually look at somebody who does research in that particular area of the ancient Near East and see how is removing of shoes connected to holy spaces. And I will try to remember to ask Celine if there was a Mesopotamian parallel of removing
Mm.
shoes in holy spaces. In any case, here, take off your shoes because you are now on holy ground. End of story until next week,
Mm.
which will be more of that story
All
and
right.
more of that story. So we're going to sort of have to remember where we left off in each one, but this is what you'll be practicing reading for next week. And this will be what we will look at as our last examination of Exodus in the year 2025. But our continuing examination of the book of Exodus in the year 5786. Vayomer Adonai Ra'o ra'iti et oni ami asher b'Mitzrayim ve'et sa'akatam shamati mipnei nogsav ki yadati et machovav. 8. Va'ered v'hatzilo miyad Mitzrayim Ulha'aloto min ha'aretz hahi el eretz tova urchava el eretz zavat chalav udvash el makom haknaani v'hachiti v'ha'emuri v'haprizi v'hachivi v'hayivusi. When you look at the translations, you'll see that verses 7 through 8 basically tell the same story that verses 9 through 12 tell from a different vantage point. So they're not both necessary, but function totally independently. Verse 9, Va'ata hine tza'akat b'nei Yisrael ba'a elai v'gam ra'iti et halachatz asher Mitzrayim lochatzim otam. 10. Va'ata lecha eshlachacha el paro v'hotzei et ami v'nei Yisrael mi Mitzrayim. 11. Vayomer Moshe el ha'Elohim mi anochi ki elech el paro. V'chi otzi et b'nei Yisrael mi Mitzrayim. 12. Vayomer ki ehyeh imach v'zel lecha ha'ot ki anochi shalachticha v'hotziacha et ha'am mi Mitzrayim ta'avdun et ha'Elohim al har ha'har hazeh. And again, you'll notice that in the blue story, we're at a mountain.
Mm.
The red story, we're actually not at a mountain. But the task is going to be the same, but the terms of the task and the context of the task are going to be different between the two.
Well,
So we get to pause, and as we go further into the book of Exodus, especially the pre-Exodus part of Exodus, we are going to become more and more confused,
Oh, goody.
which is good because then we have lots more room for midrash
yep.
and for evolution and for modern interpretation of
Mm.
what do we say about these two stories? What do we say about the combined stories? And how do we continue the message that was then into the message that can be now? So have a good week.
Thank you.
A happy Hanukkah.
Happy
I will see
Hanukkah.
you. It starts tonight. I will see you as we come to the end of Hanukkah next Sunday.
Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah,
Hanukkah.
everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.